So welcome, listeners, to Off, Over 50 and Fired, Now What with Linda.
And Shelley.
So we've been talking a lot about full-time employment with established companies, but there are other options. We'll be starting a series on different career paths, with the first one being consulting.
Right, Linda. But as usual, before we get started, let's talk about our wine recommendation for the week, which was actually recommended by today's one-off guest, Joanna. It's a Rumbauer Zinfandel. So, cheers!
So now that Shelley has let the cat out of the bag, let's officially welcome our guest, Joanna.
Joanna, we've brought her on because she's got a really nice blended background. She's been able to, over the many years of experience, either work for a large firm or go back and forth between consulting.
So, Joanna, welcome.
Thank you, Shelley and Linda.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Joanna?
I've been in the marketing and consulting business for many years, probably more years than an octopus has fingers on their legs.
Tentacles?
Tentacles, yeah, on their tentacles too. But I've worked for a number of large companies in marketing and sales and market research. I've worked for myself as a consultant, and I've done that quite a number of times, and over the years, I've actually learned how to market myself a lot better. So
one of the things that's kind of interesting, since you have worked for a lot of large companies and had that sort of security with the company, how did you get started then in consulting on your own?
So I've always considered myself to be a consultant. The first job that I had out of college was actually with an advertising agency, so I had to work with clients. And clients are always coming to you and asking you for advice. So that was a really good opportunity for me to hone my skills and be able to deal with very different people who I didn't work for. So it was actually a good learning ground. When I finally did start my business, the first time, I had a small cooperative, and it was a group of us who were professionals. We all had different skill sets, and we worked together and brought different people in as we decided that we needed help on specific projects. I think a limitation that a lot of new consultants have is that they think about themselves too broadly. And when you're over 50, you really have to narrow down that positioning that you have in the marketplace.
Yeah, I really liked what you said about the fact that you brought in folks, as a referral business, which is really good. To your point, you don't want to be so broad, and so you would have the referral business, which is really cool.
But also, I think the whole idea of having a cooperative and having other people sort of to work with and sort of carry a little bit of the burden also, you don't feel like it's all on yourself. It's an interesting idea of someone who may be a little terrified of the whole idea of going out there and being a consultant.
Right. Just a little story that I can tell you.
Sure, that'd be great.
Is the first time I started independent consulting, I decided I wanted to be a marketing consultant and go after small businesses. And what I realized, probably 6 months into it, it finally dawned on me that a small company's idea of a consultant, a marketing consultant, is somebody who's going to help them get sales. And it was more of a direct sales relationship. And that really wasn't what I was interested in. I was interested in doing strategy. So at that point, I had to start narrowing my focus so that I could communicate effectively to my potential clients about what I could bring to the party.
And did you find that you had to pursue other types of companies?
Yes, I did. I learned pretty quickly that the larger companies got it. They also had the budget. So it made a lot of sense.
Yeah, and one of the things that I was always interested in, Joanna, is that how did you toggle between the two? Go back and forth between full-time work and then filling in the gaps with consultancy.
I'm always open to opportunities. So throughout my whole career, I've always talked to a lot of people, and when an opportunity arose, I would go after it. It was just, my feeling was that if I couldn't get a consulting project, I might get a full-time project. So one of the biggest clients I had when I first started out, was a large company in Northern California. I'm a Californian by
Relocation.
by heart. And they offered me a long-term relationship, but they weren't really willing to commit. So I pushed the envelope and said, you either sign a contract or you hire me. And they said, oh, yeah, sure. And I got hired. I was very lucky, and that was the first thing. So doing that, and then on my resume, as you look at the fact that I've worked for large companies, then I've got a small company that I'm doing consulting work with, then I go work again in a large company, I come out again doing consulting. So I've been able to build it into my resume and position myself to show progression.
So part of that ability to go back and forth and be able to have that progression that you talked about, what do you think the role of networking was on your success?
When I first started out, the idea of networking was really important. However, it was really time consuming because it had to be face-to-face. I personally found that I don't like telephone calls. I don't like cold calls. I don't like to receive them, and I feel very uncomfortable making them. So I belong to a lot of organizations, and what I was able to do is get to meet people. Nowadays, it's a lot easier, frankly, because you have social media and you can go to LinkedIn. If you have enough connections on LinkedIn, they can introduce you. So it's the introductions that make it a lot easier, I think, today. And you can always go to your network and do it that way. In this digital age, we really need to take advantage of some of the tools like that.
And besides LinkedIn, are there other things that you would recommend?
With the relationships I have right now, it's been through LinkedIn. There are other companies like a Third Bridge that could introduce you to clients. I think it's a little bit harder. LinkedIn tends to be very, very easy, and everybody's on it for the most part. So
it's broad-based.
It's very broad-based.
And so, tell us a little bit more, Joanna, about how do you attract your clients?
It's all about classic marketing. That's what it really comes down to. So if you know what your positioning is, which is who are you targeting? In my case, I'm targeting larger companies. And I also know who my ideal target is. I also know who I need to talk to based on how I'm targeting them. I also know what I can bring to the party. I think that's where we talked about going a little bit more specific, because if I am very clear on how I'm positioned and how I want to position myself, I can also articulate that to my potential clients, and then I can also show them how I'm different from everybody else.
So this is where you really leverage your experience in terms of being able to hit the ground running.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. And it's taken me years. Taken me many years, 3 or 4 iterations in the independent consulting business to really get to where I'm at today.
So it's interesting. Early on in our podcast, we spent a lot of time talking about branding, but we talked it from the perspective of the person when they're trying to sell themselves. But here, when you're saying positioning, you're talking about branding yourselves.
You brand yourself whether you're looking for a job or you're looking for a client. Either way, you have to have a brand, and you have to be able to articulate what you bring to the party. And if you can't do that, then the company is not going to be intrigued enough to want to hire you or to want to give you business.
So let's say that you've attracted these clients, right? And now I think, some people struggle a little bit with how do you develop your proposals? How do you put or respond to requests or potential areas where you may bring value to a company?
So regardless of the relationship that you have with a company, whether you're a full-time employee or you're a consultant, expectations have to be clearly articulated or communicated. And so I'll give you an example. Recently, I was asked to respond to an RFP, and it was blue sky. I looked at it, and you could tell what I got was, I think it was something that probably came out of Wikipedia, and what the company was looking for was something where they wanted me to develop a program, but they didn't want to really talk to me directly or give me any information. It was very, very difficult, and I came back and said, this is not really going to work for you or for me, because you'll be disappointed, because they have no idea what they want. And they weren't really willing to have me come in and really dig deep into what their expectation was. So, I don't believe that if you build it, they will come, because that's way too broad for me. So I think that you really need to, usually there's a proposal, an RFP. You usually have a format that you use. Again, frankly, you can go to Wikipedia and get the proposal format, but in a standard approach, what you're going to talk about is, what are the objectives? What are you going to do, and articulate it very, very clearly. And the bottom line is, they want to know how much time and what it's going to cost. So it's pretty straightforward. And you just need to, depending on how big the proposal could be or how small, you just scale it up and down.
I think that's really interesting. Like when people go out into the consulting world and they really want to get work, some other person might have just gone there and just put something together. And then in the process of executing it, realized, oh, wait a second, what they really wanted, or what they, realized after going through this, I can't deliver, or it's going to be much more than the proposal I put together. So sometimes you have to be smart, like you were, and actually say no to the work when it's not well defined.
Well, I also think there's another part of this. And the other part of that is that in the moment, and I'm guilty of this, and I'm guilty of it today as well, but in the moment, you're willing to do anything. And especially if you're a sole proprietor or you're a very small company, when the client asks you, you go in there with a great presentation. You might have put a lot of effort into it, and you're giving them, for example, insights, and they come back and they think, you can turn this around for me very quickly. And let's just say, I also have had a situation where I go to the client, and when I get to see what they want, I realize, for example, data harmonization is a part of it. Well, at the time that you've given your pitch, you haven't even talked to them about that. And harmonization does take a lot of time. And so they want something in 2 weeks, and it might not be ready for 5 months. So that expectation setting is really important in the one-on-one. At the RFP stage is really important, I think.
How do you sort of get on that same page with the client, especially if they may not be as well versed or have the breadth of experience that you have to understand the potential complexity that a proposal may have or project may have?
There are 2 places, I think, where you can do this. First is, as you're developing a relationship before an RFP happens, where you're explaining what the process is. The second place is at the start of the RFP process, where as the responder, you have the right to ask if you can talk to people in the organization and discuss questions. And at the same time, that's where you do talk to your client and you educate them. So you're going in and saying, you need to understand what this process is, and these are the types of questions that we need to cover so that we can give you the right proposal. And I hope that you're making sure that that my competitors are doing the same thing. So you, in a sense, you're setting yourself up to be the expert in the room. And I think it's a matter of the relationship that you have with the client, convincing them that you're the person that they want to come to because you're the one who really understands what the business is. For example, you could be doing market research with consumers, giving them an iPad and having them filling out the questionnaire, and the client thinks, I can get those answers right away. And in some cases, they can get them in real time, but then what are they going to do with the information? And they really do need the consultant to be able to help frame the responses in a way that they can act on them. So I can give you an up and down number, but unless you can do something with it, it doesn't make any sense. So it's a matter of really understanding the correct use of information in this case that's coming out of the digital media.
I think it's important